Now, as promised, former South African President Kgalema Motlanthe says the weak civil service has led to the challenges facing the country. Touching on the current challenges facing the ANC, Motlanthe says those who have left the party and those who have announced their support for other parties during the coming elections could be seen as a blessing in disguise. Motlanthe was in conversation with our international news editor Sophie Mokoena on a range of issues, including the shifting global politics and the conflicts in the Middle East.
Well, Sophie, to be honest, I mean, we had to go through this phase. It's a phase in the life of any organization. And so the ANC itself could not be spared from going through this phase. And the exodus of some of the key members of the ANC who have decided to form their own parties from the Western Cape, Free State, KZN, and all over. That in itself, I mean, is in a sense a blessing in disguise, because when you have a exodus like that, which ordinarily creates a crisis of organization, that such crisis must never be wasted, and the ANC has to, going forward, with the exodus of problematic people, the ANC has to try to tighten up its internal processes to ensure that it remains in dynamic contact with the people, because an organization gets easily isolated once, you know, it gets cut off from ordinary South Africans. In other words, an organization receives support from ordinary people precisely because they can identify with that organization. In other words, they see themselves in that organization or being represented by that organization. But if an organization becomes too elitist, it then gets cut off here. So the ANC has got to, as part of its renewal, ensure that this young blood that comes to the fore, and that the young blood that comes to the fore gets properly steeped in the history, the mores, the ethics, values of the ANC, that it is always about the people.
Let's talk about these people that you are talking about. That would include the former president of the ANC, Jacob Zuma. You were the deputy president. Under him, you were the secretary general when he was the deputy president.
You know, I say, because we are, 3 months away from the elections, it is difficult to have rational conversation when you are in this, electioneering period. So I would say, I mean, post the elections, once the dust is settled, and people, because you see, the IEC reports that it is more than 350, parties and individuals who want to contest elections as independents. That can only happen simply because the ANC has lost its centrality as a representative of South Africans. So many South Africans who, in a sense, have lost trust in the ANC feel emboldened either to contest elections as independents or through other political parties and so on. If you compare with these impending elections with the 1994 elections, the 1994 ballot paper had 20 political parties contesting elections. Now you can imagine 350. Of course, some of them are going to fall off the radar because they may not be able to master the required number of signatures. So we don't know yet as to the exact number, but it is very clear that the voter is going to be confronted with a booklet of ballot papers. Yeah.
Let's look at the country. Lots and lots of challenges. What went wrong?
Yeah. Well, a lot, went wrong simply because, firstly, the administration, these terms, administration, for now, I mean, you may think I'm, alluding to the sixth administration, which is government. But I'm actually talking about your full-time bureaucrats. That part has to be professionalized. And
the public service.
The public service has to be professionalized. And the only way to professionalize it is to, if you read the Public Service Act, that needs tweaking so that the president must delegate authority to appoint senior managers to the Public Service Commission, with the understanding that the Public Service Commission will not itself act as the interviewing panel, but it will put together ad hoc interviewing panels made up of experts and practitioners in the field where a vacancy exists. If we do that, it would allow for the selection and appointment of the best available talent in the country.
You are part of the government as the deputy president. Some people may say you should have been able to ensure that this does happen when you are still in there. And which brings me also to a question, why did you contest the presidency? Did you perhaps see that something was going wrong? What prompted you? Is it just because you were nominated, or?
Well, you mean in 2012?
Yes.
The ANC presidency?
Yes.
Well, at that time already, I was extremely bothered by the fact that there appeared to be a tendency not to adhere to the constitution of the ANC at leadership level. And that bothered me a great deal, because if leadership knowingly breaches its own constitution, then you see it's very difficult to exercise leadership to the rest of the membership. So that's what prompted me to say, well, if I'm nominated, I will contest this position.
In terms of government, all the wrong things and issues that led to the current challenges, you were there?
Yes, I was there. And as I'm saying, the real issue here was what happens to the public service. Remember, I got into, I was elected by Parliament after the resignation of President Mbeki.
Yes.
And when I got into that position, I retained all the public servants who were there, because I had an understanding that they are there as professionals to serve the people of South Africa and not an individual. So I had no confusion, as to how to relate to them. And that's what I'm saying, that the appointment should give them permanency. They should be appointed on a permanent basis, and so that they become professional. It would make it easier, I think, to then manage the political administration interface, because at the moment, the part of what weakens the state is that the political, is preeminent over the accounting officers.
You have been observing these international effects or the changes. What is your view? Are we likely to see a new world order?
If you look at the architecture of the UN and its institutions today, it was predominantly, shaped by the preeminence of the United States of America at the end of the Second World War, because the United States of America was outside the theater of the Second World War. And so its economy was never disrupted by the war, as it were, whereas the rest of Europe, they had to resort to war economies. Now, that, of course, gave the United States a special position of preeminence in global affairs. And that goes for the United Nations and its organs. And if you recall, the dollar was a promissory note that if you produce it to the central bank, you would be given certain ounces of gold.
Yes.
Yes. But by 1973, in the wake of the end of the towards the end of the Vietnam War, America decoupled its gold from the dollar. So the dollar remained as reserve currency globally, but it's a piece of paper based really on the state of health of the American economy. And so once this status of the dollar as a reserve currency globally diminishes, the influence of America and the dominance of America will also diminish. So that, to me, indicates that we are getting into a period of transition from America serving as the citadel of the world to one where America's dominance and influence would be diminished.
Politically?
Because you see, we lived, in our own lifetime through the British Empire where the sun never set, and it did set.
It did.
Yeah. So I think we are getting into a period of transition.
Is the world ready for that?
Well, that's not something that depends on the likes and dislikes of these countries. That's going to happen of its own, because President Trump has an approach which says, why is America contributing so much money to the UN Human Rights Commission? Because the UN Human Rights Commission is critical of America. Therefore, America's contribution or allocation must be reduced or withdrawn completely. Now, if he comes back to power, he will precipitate America's isolation because he doesn't seem to understand that America's influence is a function of America's contribution to these institutions.
Now let's look at the situation in Gaza. Almost 30,000 people have died. Yes, we know it started on the 7th of October. Do you think when you look at what is happening and where we are, did the international community act in a responsible manner?
The painful thing about what's going on today is that human lives have been lost, and those who call for peace ought to be consistent. You call for peace all the time, in all situations, because war itself is not a solution to problems. And we, as South Africa, have as our national anthem, Morena Boloka Setjhaba sa heso, o fedise dintwa le matshwenyeho, because that part of our national anthem was composed by Moses Mphahlele during the middle of the Second World War in 1942. So if we are true to and faithful to our national anthem, we should call for peace all the time.
Now, finally, the two-state solution, is it a possibility when you look at the two nations?
Well, to be honest with you, the call from the Palestinians, that from the river to the sea, is a clamor and a call for their own piece of land, where they can say, this is our home. The Israelis, over the years, had a similar call until 1948. And from 1948, they were given the piece of land in Israel. But they've been expanding that by essentially displacing Palestinians. And so the facts on the ground, both in the occupied West Bank and Gaza, is, completely razed to the ground. And taking into account that Gaza itself is actually an amalgam of refugee camps. So you have the right of return, which allows for Jews from all over the world to resettle in places like the West Bank, but which does not allow any Palestinian refugee to go back to their homes. So that the facts in both occupied West Bank as well as Gaza don't admit to a two-state solution. Essentially, if there were brave people on both sides, brave leadership, they would settle for a one-state federal type solution rather than now, because it's clear you have the Israelis clearly trying to push out all Palestinians to where nobody knows.
And that is former President Kgalema Motlanthe in conversation with SABC News International editor Sophie Mokoena.